Incident at the coffee shop. Maplewood Café was a place of quiet luxury nestled in the bustling heart of downtown Maplewood. Known for its handcrafted pastries, gourmet coffee, and an atmosphere of refined charm, the café attracted professionals, students, and creatives alike. Each morning, the scent of freshly ground coffee beans wafted into the street, enticing passers-by inside. Malik Turner had become a regular here over the past 2 years. At 42, Malik was a celebrated history professor at Maplewood University, widely respected for his compelling lectures on civil rights history. Tall, poised, and always impeccably dressed, he carried himself with quiet confidence. Today, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and tailored trousers, he stood patiently in line, mentally rehearsing the keynote address he was set to deliver at the city's renowned cultural symposium later that afternoon. Ahead of him in line was a diverse assortment of customers. An elderly man reading a newspaper, 2 university students chatting animatedly about exams, and a businesswoman checking emails on her phone. Directly behind Malik stood a teenage girl quietly scrolling through social media, earbuds softly playing music. The morning was ordinary and peaceful, at least at first. The tranquility shattered suddenly as a loud, impatient voice rang out from behind them all. "Excuse me, can I just get my coffee already?" demanded a woman pushing her way forward through the waiting customers. The woman, Helen Cartwright, was easily recognizable in Maplewood society. Wealthy, influential, and known for her charitable donations to local institutions. Today, however, Helen was not in a charitable mood. Late for an important meeting, she saw nothing but obstacles between herself and her caramel latte. "Ma'am, there's a line," Malik said calmly but firmly, extending his arm gently to prevent her from pushing further. His voice was polite, though his eyes held firm determination. Helen turned sharply, her gaze narrowing. Malik had unknowingly ignited a flame. "And who asked you?" she snapped, her voice raised enough to silence the surrounding conversations. Heads turned, drawn to the growing conflict. Malik remained composed, maintaining his stance. "It's a matter of simple respect. Everyone here is waiting their turn." Helen's face reddened as embarrassment mixed with anger. She glanced around, seeing all eyes fixed on her. Unwilling to admit fault, she fired back instinctively. "Respect? You people always demand respect. If you don't like the way things are here, then go back to Africa." An abrupt silence filled the cafe, as tangible as the polished marble floor. Coffee machines ceased their hissing. Baristas froze in shock, and conversations halted mid-sentence. The words hung in the air, sharp and bitter. Malik felt the sting of her words deep in his chest. He was no stranger to racism, having faced subtle, and sometimes not so subtle comments throughout his life. Yet each incident remained painful, never diminished by repetition. The echo of her hatred lingered, an ugly mark staining the morning's peace. He took a slow breath, gathering his composure. Malik knew everyone was watching him closely, anticipating his reaction. The teenage girl behind him had discreetly started filming the incident on her phone. Malik was conscious of every gaze, every expression: shock, embarrassment, disbelief, even shame. Helen, now aware of the gravity of her words, stood frozen, her hand still clutching her designer handbag. She wavered between bravado and fear, pride forcing her to maintain her stance, though her eyes betrayed her growing uncertainty. Finally, Malik spoke, his voice measured and calm, yet clear enough to reach every ear in the cafe. "Ma'am, I'm from here. Maplewood is my home. My parents and grandparents were born in this country. I've never even visited Africa, not yet anyway, though it would be a beautiful place to visit." He paused deliberately, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. Helen, who'd expected an angry outburst, seemed momentarily stunned by his calm dignity. Malik continued gently, addressing not just Helen, but the entire room. "America, including Maplewood, was built on diversity. We all have ancestors from different parts of the world, including your own. Perhaps it would benefit all of us if we remembered that more often." A tense silence followed his words, replaced slowly by a growing murmur of admiration. Some patrons nodded approvingly, while others exchanged looks of discomfort, quietly confronting their own biases. Helen's cheeks flamed brighter, her anger transforming into humiliation. She opened her mouth as though to speak, then closed it again, momentarily unable to formulate a response. Malik had disarmed her not with aggression, but with dignity and truth, exposing her own prejudice publicly, unmistakably. Unable to bear the weight of the silent accusations, Helen spun abruptly on her heel. "You haven't heard the last of this!" she snarled weakly, her voice trembling. Then she stormed from the cafe, abandoning her latte entirely. In the aftermath, the cafe's atmosphere shifted again, slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy. Malik quietly stepped to the counter and calmly ordered his usual cappuccino. The barista served him with profound respect in her eyes, whispering, "I'm so sorry you had to endure that." Malik offered a reassuring smile, accepting his coffee graciously. "Thank you," he said gently, "but I'm afraid that's nothing new for people like me. Perhaps one day it will be." As he walked toward the exit, coffee in hand, several patrons spontaneously began to applaud softly, a tribute not to his humiliation, but to his composure, grace, and the powerful message he'd delivered. Malik nodded humbly, touched yet embarrassed by the attention. Stepping outside into the fresh air, Malik released a deep, steadying breath, the encounter lingering heavily in his thoughts. He had managed the situation admirably, yet he knew the battle against ignorance and prejudice was far from over. Little did he realize, however, that this brief incident, captured in sharp clarity by the teenage girl's video, was about to spark a national conversation, changing lives and confronting prejudice in ways Malik had never imagined. Calm under fire. Outside the Maplewood Café, the cool morning breeze carried the scent of roasted beans and the fading echo of tension. Malik Turner walked slowly, sipping his cappuccino, trying to calm the hum of emotions still coursing through him. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more complex than that, a bittersweet mix of sorrow, frustration, and the quiet pain of having to explain once again that he belonged. He strolled down Elmwood Avenue, passing storefronts and pedestrians, many of whom gave him curious glances. Some recognized him as the man from the cafe. Others nodded respectfully. Still, Malik remained deep in thought. For all the years he'd taught civil rights history, it never stopped feeling personal. As he reached the corner, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but swiped to answer. "Hello? Professor Turner?" A young woman's voice hesitated. "Sorry to call you out of the blue. My name is Alina Gonzalez. I was behind you in line at the cafe this morning." Malik paused, recalling the teenager with earbuds. "Yes, I remember. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said quickly. "But I filmed what happened. I posted the video online, and it's getting a lot of views. Like, a lot. I wanted to tell you directly, in case it blows up." Malik stopped walking. "You recorded the exchange?" "I did. I wasn't sure at first if I should post it. But the way you handled her, it was powerful. People need to see that. I blurred your face just in case, but it's already spreading." He exhaled slowly. "How many views?" "Over 200,000. In 4 hours." Malik's grip tightened slightly on the phone. He looked up at the sky, where the sun was rising steadily. "I see. I'm sorry if this causes you trouble," Alina added. "I can take it down if you want." "No," he said after a moment. "Let it stay. Maybe it'll open some eyes." She sounded relieved. "I think it already is." As he hung up, Malik stood silently at the intersection. He never sought attention, especially not the kind that came from viral videos. But the truth was out there now, echoing far beyond the cafe walls. He took the longer route to campus, needing time to think. Along the way, a man on a bicycle rode by and offered a thumbs up. A woman watering her garden paused to call out, "We saw you on Twitter. What you said was beautiful." By the time Malik arrived at Maplewood University, he knew the news had spread farther than he anticipated. Inside his office, Malik sat at his desk, scrolling through the video Alina had posted. The caption read, "This man was told to go back to Africa, His response, watch until the end. The comments were a tidal wave. This is how you shut down hate, with dignity. What a man. We need more leaders like him. That woman was disgusting. Glad she got called out. I've been on the receiving end of comments like that. Thank you, sir, for representing us with strength. But not all of them were supportive. There were trolls, as there always were. Typical victim mentality. He should have put her in her place. Sick of hearing about racism every time someone gets offended. Malik sighed and closed the app. Social media was never where he found peace. He looked around his office, lined with books, awards, and framed photographs of civil rights leaders. A picture of his late father caught his eye. Reverend Elijah Turner, a man of the cloth and a man of the people, had marched in Selma, spoken in churches across the South, and raised his children with unshakable pride in their heritage. Malik rose, walking over to the window. Students crossed the campus green below, backpacks slung, earbuds in, lives moving forward. And yet, here he stood. Decades after the marches, after Martin and Malcolm, after Obama and the promise of change, still having to explain that he was American enough. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his department chair, Dr. Lily Masters. Malik, she said without preamble. You're on fire. You know that, right? I'm aware, he said dryly. I just spoke to the dean. CNN wants to interview you. MSNBC too. Local stations are already camped outside the cafe asking for a statement. Malik pinched the bridge of his nose. I didn't plan any of this, Lily. I know, she said gently. But this moment has chosen you. And let's be honest, who better to speak on this than you? He didn't answer immediately. There's something else, she added. The mayor's office called. They want to invite you to speak at the City Cultural Unity Forum next week. Malik felt the familiar knot of responsibility tightening in his chest. I'll think about it. Don't take too long, she said. People are listening now. After she hung up, Malik leaned against his desk, absorbing it all. Was this what his father had felt when he stood before his first congregation, unsure if his words would heal or divide? Was this what his grandfather had felt when he cast his first vote after the Voting Rights Act passed, wondering if it would change anything? He wasn't sure, but he knew this. Silence wasn't an option anymore. That evening, Malik walked through the city's historic district thinking. He stopped in front of the old courthouse, once a symbol of exclusion, now bearing a bronze plaque commemorating the end of segregation in the region. He read the words again, words he'd read 100 times. Freedom cannot be given. It must be claimed. The air was cool now, the sun dipping behind the trees. Across the square, a young black boy stood with his father, pointing up at the same plaque. Malik walked over, drawn by instinct. Evening, the father said, nodding. Evening, Malik replied, smiling. My son says he saw you online, the man added. You handled that woman better than I think I would have. I appreciate that. You taught him something today. Taught all of us. Malik looked down at the boy, who beamed up at him. What's your name? Josiah, the boy said. Well, Josiah, Malik said, crouching slightly. You make sure you always remember who you are and where you come from. That way, no one can take your place in this world. Josiah nodded solemnly. His father placed a hand on his shoulder. Malik stood up, feeling the emotion rise in his chest. As he walked back to his apartment that night, he no longer felt the weight of humiliation. In its place was something else, responsibility, yes, but also a spark. His calm had spoken louder than the hate. Now, the world was listening. The viral storm. By sunrise the next day, Malik Turner's world had transformed. His phone vibrated non-stop, text after text, call after call. The viral video from Maplewood Café had erupted beyond anything he could have imagined. National media outlets had picked it up, turning Malik's calm response into a symbol of dignity and restraint in the face of blatant racism. Within 24 hours, the clip had surpassed 4 million views. He sat at his kitchen table, toast uneaten on his plate, as he scrolled through the headlines. Man silenced hate with grace, a masterclass in decency. Huffington Post. Go back to Africa racist rant, met with powerful calm. CNN. Who is Malik Turner? The history professor who just schooled America. NPR. Every outlet wanted a piece of him. There were requests for interviews, guest columns, podcasts, morning shows, and more. Even celebrities had retweeted the video. One A-list actor called Malik a modern-day king, while a prominent civil rights activist said, "We don't just need this man on TV, we need him in office." Malik, however, wasn't basking in the limelight. He was overwhelmed. His phone buzzed again. Lily Masters, his department chair. "Malik," she said brightly, "I hope you've had coffee." "3 cups," he muttered. "I figured," she chuckled. "Listen, CNN wants you for a live interview tomorrow. Their primetime slot. You'd be talking with Anderson Cooper." He rubbed his temples. "Lily, I don't know if I want this." She softened her voice. "You don't have to want it, but you may need it. Look, I understand this isn't your style, but what you said, what you did, people needed to hear it. You didn't shout, you didn't belittle. You told the truth, and you did it with dignity." He was silent for a moment. "Maybe this is your classroom too," she added. "Just a bigger one." That phrase stuck with him. He taught students how to recognize injustice, how to learn from the past, how to build a better future. Maybe now he had the chance to teach millions. "All right," he said finally. "Let's do it." Across town, Helen Cartwright sat in her silent kitchen, eyes glued to her television screen. Her hands trembled as she flipped from channel to channel, every single one covering her moment. She wasn't named in most reports, yet, but people were beginning to connect the dots. Her distinct blonde bob, her gold brooch, her sharp voice. It wouldn't take long before someone called her out by name. Her inbox was already flooded. Some messages were from strangers who recognized her, others from colleagues and clients. Many were furious, some were pitying. Her employer, a high-end real estate firm, had placed her on immediate suspension, citing behavior unbecoming of a community representative. Helen hadn't left her house in 2 days. "I was provoked," she muttered to herself. "He blocked my way. I didn't mean it like that." But she knew deep down, she had meant it. In that moment of anger, her true thoughts had surfaced, unfiltered and raw. Her son had called the night before. "Mom, you need to apologize," he'd said flatly. "I won't grovel to social media," she snapped. "It's not social media," he replied. "It's you. You were wrong." Helen stared at her phone now, debating. Her pride clawed at her, telling her to stay silent. But her life was unraveling fast, and silence would not save her. Meanwhile, Malik was preparing for his interview. His modest apartment was suddenly crowded with producers, technicians, and a stylist sent by CNN. They helped adjust the lighting, position the camera, and test audio levels. Malik sat in a simple armchair, shelves of books and framed awards behind him. "You'll be live with Anderson in 2 minutes," the producer said. He took a deep breath, calming the flutter in his chest. He'd spoken to large audiences before, but never with the entire country watching. And then Anderson Cooper's voice filled his earpiece. "Joining us now is Professor Malik Turner, the man at the center of the viral incident that has sparked national dialogue. Professor Turner, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me, Anderson," Malik said evenly. Anderson began by playing the clip again. The café. The insult. Malik's calm rebuttal. Silence followed. "I think what struck so many people," Anderson began, "was your composure. Most would have responded with anger. How did you stay so calm?" Malik paused. "Because I've spent my whole life preparing for moments like that. My father taught me that there's power in restraint. That sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. I wasn't just responding to her, I was speaking to every young black boy and girl who might be told the same thing one day." Anderson nodded solemnly. "Do you think this incident reflects something deeper in our culture?" "Yes," Malik replied. "Racism isn't always burning crosses and slurs. Sometimes it's subtle, policies, assumptions, silence in the face of injustice. But other times, like at that cafe, it rises to the surface. It's ugly, but it's real. And pretending it doesn't exist only allows it to grow. The interview continued for 15 minutes. Malik shared stories from his childhood, his classroom, and his vision for change. Not through punishment, but through education and empathy. By the end, Anderson thanked him. "Professor Turner, your voice is powerful. I hope the nation listens." The broadcast ended. Malik sat back, exhaling deeply. It was done. The response was immediate. His inbox exploded again, this time with messages from high school teachers requesting to show the interview in class, civil rights groups asking him to speak, students from around the world thanking him. One message stood out. "Dear Professor Turner, I'm white, 17, and live in a very racist town. I've said things in the past I'm ashamed of. But watching you made me realize how wrong I've been. Thank you for opening my eyes." Malik blinked, reading it again. Then a second message came. "I'm a black single mother. I showed my son your interview. He's 9. He asked, 'Can I be like him when I grow up?' I told him, 'Yes, baby. You already are.'" Malik sat quietly for a long time. He hadn't asked to be a symbol. He wasn't trying to be anyone's hero. But something had shifted. People weren't just watching. They were learning. And perhaps that was enough. But across town, someone else was watching too. Helen, curled on her couch, tears slowly running down her face. Not out of anger this time, but something foreign. Something unfamiliar. Was it regret? For the first time, she began to question not just what she'd said, but why. The viral storm had not only elevated Malik, it had cracked something open in Helen Cartwright too. Helen's downward spiral. Helen Cartwright stood in her immaculate living room, the morning sun casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Her phone buzzed endlessly on the kitchen counter. Texts, emails, calls she didn't answer. She clutched a coffee mug with trembling hands, her nerves raw and her mind spiraling. She hadn't slept properly in days. Ever since the video from Maplewood Café went viral, Helen had become a national disgrace. She didn't need to search for her name online. Everyone else had done it for her. Racist Karen memes, side-by-side screenshots of her from the video, and her company's employee page, even TikToks mocking her accent and smug expression. It was everywhere. She glanced at her inbox, where a flood of angry messages waited. Most were strangers accusing her of being everything from ignorant to evil. But some were worse. Former colleagues, board members, even church friends writing to say they were disappointed that she no longer represented their values. Her real estate firm had placed her on indefinite suspension and deleted her profile from their website. They released a statement within hours of the video's explosion. "We do not condone racism or hate speech in any form. This behavior does not align with our company's values." Helen had called them in outrage, shouting into the phone, "I've been with you people for 11 years. One moment of frustration and now I'm thrown to the wolves?" The HR director, voice cold and measured, replied, "You said what you said, Helen. On camera. We can't unsee that, and neither can our clients." Helen slammed the phone down that day and hadn't picked it up since. Her son, Grant, had tried to reason with her. "You can't just pretend this will go away," he'd said over FaceTime. "You need to apologize. Publicly." "I won't," she snapped. "Apologizing means I agree with what everyone's saying about me." "You screamed at a stranger to go back to Africa in front of an entire cafe, Mom," he replied. "People don't just forget that." She'd hung up on him too, but the silence afterward was deafening. Her world was shrinking, collapsing in on itself. Friends avoided her calls, neighbors turned their backs. Even her book club had canceled their next meeting without explanation. Helen wandered to the window and looked out at the quiet Maplewood cul-de-sac she had called home for 20 years. Everything looked the same. Orderly hedges, expensive cars and driveways, morning joggers. But she felt like a ghost in it all. "I didn't mean it the way they took it," she muttered aloud. "But didn't she?" When she was angry, uncomfortable, or threatened, she had always fallen back on the same rhetoric. The tired superiority, the know your place attitude passed down over dinner tables and whispered family gossip. She thought of her late father. A hard man, proud, and unapologetic. He had told her more than once, "Some people will never be like us, Helen. And you don't need to pretend they are." She had believed him then. She wasn't sure now. That same day, Malik Turner sat in the university library, sifting through a stack of handwritten letters that had arrived by mail. Since his televised interview, the flood of digital messages had been joined by hundreds of physical ones, many from school children, some from elderly activists, and a surprising number from white Americans expressing guilt, shame, and hope. He read one aloud to himself, softly. "Dear Professor Turner, I'm 68 and grew up in Alabama. I heard 'go back to Africa' more times than I can count. I've said things in the past I'm not proud of. But watching you reminded me it's never too late to listen and learn. Thank you." Malik folded the letter and set it aside. A knock came at his office door. It was his colleague and friend, Professor Lena Hart, holding 2 coffees. "You've officially become the face of grace under fire," she teased, handing him one. "Don't remind me," he chuckled, accepting it gratefully. She sat across from him. "You doing okay?" "I'm coping," he said honestly. "This all happened so fast. I didn't ask for any of this." "But maybe you were the one we needed when it happened," Lena replied. "The way you handled her, Helen, taught more people in 5 minutes than some folks learn in a lifetime." Malik nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "I don't want her destroyed. I just wanted people to see that hate doesn't deserve more hate." Lena looked at him curiously. "Do you think she'll apologize?" He shrugged. "I don't know. But I hope she learns something from this." That evening, Helen sat alone, scrolling through articles about herself. She had done a full search of her name. Helen Cartwright racist. Maplewood Karen. Go back to Africa woman. The titles made her stomach twist. A particular article caught her eye. The woman who said, "Go back to Africa. What happens next?" Op-ed by Jason Riley, civil rights writer. It read, "What Helen Cartwright did was vile. But we must remember, she is a product of silence. Silence in the face of prejudice. Silence in confronting bias. This is a moment for public accountability, but also for personal transformation. What she does next could mean everything." The words struck her harder than she expected. Personal transformation. Could she change? Or was she already too far gone? She reached for her iPad and opened the now famous video again. There she was. Frozen mid-yell, face twisted in rage, veins visible in her neck. She barely recognized herself. Then came Malik's reply. His calm. His dignity. His quiet, confident voice explaining that this was his home. That he had never even been to Africa. That America was built by immigrants, including her ancestors. Helen leaned forward as if hearing it for the first time. Something in his voice. The way he refused to be baited. The sadness beneath his strength. Broke through the layers of arrogance and pride. Tears welled in her eyes. She had always thought herself educated. Cultured. Generous. She donated to charities. Volunteered for the community. She even had black colleagues she'd invited to dinner parties. But what had she truly believed? What had she really felt in that moment when challenged by a black man asking only for basic decency? And why did she go straight to those words? Her hand hovered over the screen. Then slowly, shakily, she opened the email app and began typing. 2. Public Relations at maplewoodfirm.com. Subject, public statement and apology. She stared at the blinking cursor, the white screen stretching before her like a cliff's edge. She had a choice now. Retreat deeper into shame and bitterness. Or take the first terrifying step toward something unfamiliar. Humility. The spiral had brought her low. But it might also bring her clarity. Invitation to dialogue. The morning sun filtered through Malik Turner's office window, casting golden rectangles on the floor. He sat at his desk, half reading an email while his thoughts drifted. For days, he had been inundated with messages from strangers, journalists, community leaders. Every major news network wanted a second interview. Talk shows requested his presence. His story had become a symbol, his words quoted like scripture in comment threads and op-eds. Yet he still felt like a man who'd simply spoken up when someone tried to humiliate him. He had just finished replying to a student who thanked him for being the voice my father never had, when his phone rang. The caller ID read, "Morning Circle Live." He answered. "Professor Turner, good morning," said a warm, professional voice. "This is Candace Miles, senior producer for Morning Circle. We'd love to have you on our show for a live segment this Friday. 10-minute feature, in studio. We can send transportation." Malik hesitated. "Professor?" she prompted gently. "I've done a few interviews already," he said. "What makes this one different?" She didn't flinch. "We're inviting someone else to join you. Helen Cartwright." Malik sat up straighter, brows furrowing. "She agreed?" he asked, incredulous. Candace cleared her throat. "After days of silence, she reached out to us herself, said she wants to make a public apology. We weren't sure whether to believe her, but she insists it needs to be done in front of the person she hurt." A long silence followed. Malik turned to look out the window, watching students drift by on the campus green. "I'm not interested in public humiliation," he said finally. "If she's coming just to save face, I'm not playing a role in her performance." "She said she's ready to listen," Candace said. "But that's your decision. We won't do it without your consent." Malik exhaled slowly, tapping a pencil on the edge of his desk. His father had always told him that true strength wasn't how hard you hit. It was how deeply you listened. "I'll do it," he said at last. "But I'm not coming to debate her. I'm coming to speak to everyone watching." Friday morning arrived with heavy clouds hanging over Manhattan. Malik's car pulled up to the towering glass building that housed Morning Circle Live, one of the nation's most watched morning talk shows. Cameras, stage lights, and a wall of makeup artists buzzed around the studio's backstage area. He was ushered into the green room, where a crisp suit and mic technician awaited. After changing, Malik paced briefly, running his thoughts like a lecture outline. What to say, what not to say, how to avoid sounding preachy or vindictive. His chest thudded, not with fear, but with a tight awareness. This moment mattered. Just before showtime, a producer stepped in. "Helen Cartwright has arrived. She's in the opposite green room. She looks nervous." Malik nodded once, offering no further comment. Inside the studio, the hosts welcomed viewers with their usual morning cheer. Then came the transition to the segment that millions across the country had tuned in to see. "Our next story," began host Julia Grant, "is one that sparked powerful conversations across America. When a woman in a coffee shop shouted a hateful slur, the man she targeted responded not with anger, but with grace. Today, for the first time, they meet face to face." The camera panned to Malik as he walked on stage, calm and collected. Applause erupted from the audience. He gave a polite nod, taking his seat. Then came Helen. She stepped out slowly, her face pale, her posture stiff. The audience fell quiet, unsure how to react. She was dressed conservatively in a navy blue blazer, her hair pulled back. As she sat across from Malik, her eyes flicked to him, and stayed there. "Thank you both for being here," Julia said. "Helen, we'll start with you. Why did you agree to appear today?" Helen cleared her throat. Her voice was small, but steady. "Because I was wrong. I said something cruel, ignorant, and racist. And I said it publicly. I needed to apologize publicly too." Julia nodded. "And to whom are you apologizing?" Helen turned fully to Malik now, her voice catching slightly. "To you, Professor Turner. I humiliated you in front of strangers. I reduced you to a stereotype in a fit of anger. I'm ashamed of it. I'm not proud of what I've become in that moment. And I want to say, I'm sorry." The studio was dead silent. Malik looked at her carefully. His expression was unreadable, neither forgiving nor condemning. "Why did you say what you did?" he asked quietly. Helen swallowed hard. Because I've lived most of my life surrounded by people who think like that. I never thought I was racist, but in that moment, I proved that I was. And the truth is, I never questioned it until that video played back, until I saw myself through the eyes of others. The audience murmured. Some people nodded. Others looked skeptical. Julia turned to Malik. Professor Turner, how do you respond to that apology? He let a moment pass before answering. I didn't come here to accept or reject her apology, Malik said. I came here to speak to everyone who's ever thought someone's humanity was up for debate. That day at the cafe, I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending every kid who's been told they don't belong. He leaned forward slightly. You don't fight hate by becoming what you hate. That's what my father taught me. So when Helen said those words, I had a choice. I could fight back with anger, or I could offer her, and everyone watching, a mirror. Helen blinked rapidly, her eyes moist. You held a mirror up to me, she said softly. And I didn't like what I saw, but I needed to see it. The audience clapped, not loudly, but meaningfully. Julia concluded, This is not a segment we'll forget. Professor Turner. Helen, thank you. The camera faded out as the audience stood in slow applause. Backstage, the energy was quieter. Malik walked down the corridor, feeling emotionally drained but steady. Helen approached him cautiously. May I say one more thing? She asked. He turned to her. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. But I hope one day I can earn it. Not by words. By doing better. Malik nodded. Doing better is a good place to start. He turned to leave but paused. There's a community forum next week, City Hall. If you're serious about learning, you'll be there. I will, she promised. That evening, clips from the segment spread across the internet. Racist woman apologizes, and the man she insulted shows what true grace looks like. America needed this moment. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's leadership. Malik sat alone in his apartment, watching the clip one final time before shutting off his screen. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long while, he felt like the dialogue had truly begun. Not just on camera, but in hearts. The truth about Helen. Helen Cartwright sat on the edge of her bed, clutching a photo album from decades past. Her hair, usually flawless, hung limp around her face. Her navy blue suit from the talk show still lay crumpled over the arm of a chair, untouched since she returned home. Though the applause from the audience had been polite, measured, and the online reception to her apology was mixed, something inside her had undeniably shifted. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just embarrassed. She was ashamed. She turned the pages of the album slowly. Pictures of her as a teenager posing next to her father's vintage Chevrolet. Family picnics in upstate New York. Her high school graduation. Her mother clapping on the bleachers in a floral dress. Everything seemed faded, like watching a movie of someone else's life. She found a black and white photo of her grandparents standing in front of a modest tenement building in the Bronx, taken sometime in the 1940s. Her grandfather, Joseph Kowalski, had come from Poland with nothing but a suitcase and a handful of English phrases. He'd worked in steel for 40 years. Her grandmother, Agnes, cleaned houses 6 days a week. They had endured hardship, discrimination, and suspicion in a country that often didn't want them. And yet, Helen had grown up believing she was different. Better. Somewhere along the line, her family's story of struggle had been rewritten into one of entitlement. That realization was haunting. She opened her laptop and hesitantly searched. Joseph Kowalski immigration records. What she found was humbling. Photos of immigrants crowded onto ships, documents listing her grandfather among them, marked non-English speaking, low income, denied housing due to foreign name. She covered her mouth with her hand. Everything Malik had said, about people forgetting where they came from, hit her like a tidal wave. She wasn't just someone who had said something racist. She had become the very kind of person who would have once hated her own grandfather. The doorbell rang. Helen startled, quickly closing the laptop. She opened the door to find her neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, standing with her arms crossed. "I wasn't going to say anything," Mrs. Perkins began. Her tone clipped. "But you owe more than just an apology on national television." Helen blinked, unsure whether this was an accusation or an offer. "You humiliated yourself," Mrs. Perkins said. "But more importantly, you hurt people. That man didn't just stand there and forgive you because he's polite. He did it because he believes people can change. Do you?" Helen's throat tightened. "I'm trying." "Then try harder," Mrs. Perkins said, pressing a slim envelope into Helen's hand. "This is a flyer for the Unity Forum next week. Don't go to be seen. Go to listen." Then she turned and walked back across the street. Helen stood on her porch for a long time, clutching the paper. Meanwhile, across town, Malik stood in the community archives room of Maplewood Public Library. He'd been invited to speak at the Unity Forum the following week, and he was searching for local historical documents to support his speech. He flipped through clippings from the 1960s, images of segregated schools, local protests, the burning cross left on the front lawn of the city's first black councilwoman. So much of Maplewood's history had been buried under polite silence. An elderly librarian named Miss Yvette approached. "Professor Turner," she said softly, holding out a manila folder. "I thought this might interest you." He opened it and paused. Inside were letters from Polish immigrants in the 1940s complaining about being called un-American, denied housing, threatened at work. One was signed Joseph Kowalski. "Who was he?" Malik asked. "Worked the steel mills," she said. "Good man, from what I hear. People didn't like him at first. Called him a dirty foreigner. Said he'd never belong." Malik looked at the signature again, a thought slowly forming. "Kowalski. Cartwright was his daughter's married name," she added. "You may know her." Malik stared at the paper. He didn't speak for a long time. "Helen?" he said finally. "That's her grandfather?" Miss Yvette nodded. Malik sat back in stunned silence. The woman who told him to go back to Africa came from a man who'd once been told to go back to Poland. How quickly people forget. Back at her home, Helen began writing in a leather-bound notebook. No camera crew, no makeup, no stage, just ink and truth. "I don't know if I'll ever fully erase what I said. But I want to understand it. Where it came from. How I became someone who weaponizes identity in moments of discomfort. I was taught to be proud of where I came from. But I was never taught to respect where others come from too. My grandfather came to America with nothing, and people hated him for his name. I know now I became the kind of person who would have mocked him. I'm sorry, Grandpa." She wiped her eyes and kept writing. "To Professor Turner, I don't deserve your grace, but I want to be worthy of the chance you gave me. Not through words, through action." She looked up at the flyer from Mrs. Perkins. The Unity Forum. 1 week away. She wasn't ready, but she would go. Days later, a podcast host released a special segment titled Helen Cartwright, A Wound Exposed. It featured interviews with residents from Maplewood, some who knew Helen personally, others who'd watched her apology. The episode also included clips of Malik Turner speaking at previous events, and one segment stood out. "We carry pain that isn't always our own. Injustice is inherited like trauma, but so is resilience. If we choose to remember where we all came from, not just individually, but as a nation, we can start to write a better future." The host concluded, "Redemption is never guaranteed, but it's always possible." As the day of the Unity Forum drew near, Helen did something she hadn't done in years. She walked down to the community center and volunteered to help fold pamphlets. The staff eyed her warily, unsure how to react. She didn't push conversation. She just worked. Quiet, consistent, present. One young volunteer finally broke the silence. "Why are you really here?" Helen didn't look up. "To listen," she said simply. The young man nodded and went back to sorting. And for the first time since that infamous day in the cafe, Helen Cartwright felt like she was moving forward. Not to restore her old life, but to build a new one. And this time, it would be built on truth. Malik's powerful address. City Hall was transformed. Banners reading Unity Forum repairing the fabric lined the brick facade. Maplewood's Municipal Plaza, normally a quiet patch of trimmed hedges and flagpoles, was now a vibrant hub of people from every corner of the city. School children waved handmade signs. Church choirs rehearsed softly in the rotunda. Local food vendors served everything from soul food to Polish pierogi. It was as if the city had collectively exhaled and decided, just for today, to listen. Inside the grand auditorium, every seat was filled. People stood along the walls. The mayor, city council, educators, business leaders, activists, and average citizens sat shoulder to shoulder. The energy was electric, but not just with anticipation. There was a shared seriousness in the room. A feeling that this wasn't just an event, it was a reckoning. Malik Turner stood behind the curtain backstage, watching the crowd through a thin slit. He adjusted the lapel of his dark gray blazer, inhaling deeply. It wasn't nerves exactly. It was weight. The responsibility. The moment. He held a folded sheet of notes in his hand, but had already committed every word to memory. This wasn't going to be a lecture. This was testimony. A volunteer walked over and whispered, "You're up in 2." He nodded. He had done this 100 times, spoken in classrooms, on panels, on national TV. But this was different. This was home. This was personal. The host stepped to the podium and spoke into the mic. And now, I have the honor of introducing a man who has, in recent weeks, reminded us all what dignity under fire truly looks like. Professor of history at Maplewood University, author, speaker, and a voice of wisdom in a moment of chaos. Please welcome Professor Malik Turner. Thunderous applause broke out as Malik walked onto the stage. He moved slowly, deliberately, and as he reached the podium, he didn't speak right away. He scanned the crowd, faces young and old, white and black, brown, biracial, immigrant, native-born, all of them waiting. Then he leaned into the mic and began. "Good evening," he said calmly. "When I was 8 years old, my father told me something I've never forgotten. He said, 'You can't control what comes at you, son, but you can always control how you respond.'" He paused, letting the words settle. When that woman in the cafe told me to go back to Africa, I remembered those words. And I remembered something else too. This land, this community, is as much mine as anyone else's. My great-grandfather built train tracks in this state. My grandfather was a war veteran. My father led marches. I belong here. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. But I didn't come here to relive that incident, he continued. I came here to talk about what it means for all of us. Because that moment wasn't about just me or her. It was about something older and deeper. It was about what happens when we stop listening, when we forget history, when we pretend racism is a thing of the past rather than a ghost still living in our homes, our schools, our laws. He looked across the audience. "We've all inherited something," he said. "Some of us inherit struggle. Some of us inherit privilege. Most of us inherit a mix of both. But what we do with that inheritance, that's the question." He folded his notes and set them aside. The audience sat silently, hanging on every word. "My father used to tell stories about growing up in the Jim Crow South. I've told my students about how the civil rights movement didn't end in 1965. It evolved into redlining, into voter suppression, into unconscious bias, into fear masked as tradition." He paused again. "And yet, I'm hopeful. Because something is shifting. Something powerful. We're not just seeing racism. We're facing it. Talking about it. Calling it by name. That's how change begins." He straightened. "I didn't forgive Helen Cartwright on national television because I'm soft. I forgave her because I believe redemption is real. Because I believe if we only destroy people, we destroy the opportunity to change them." A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. She made a mistake, a terrible one. But she showed up today. Heads turned. In the back row, Helen Cartwright sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes met Malik's briefly. No cameras, no press, just her. She didn't come to speak, Malik added. She came to listen. That's a start. We all have to start somewhere. Applause broke out again. This time not just for him, but for the idea that healing was possible. But we cannot stop at listening, he continued. We must act. Teach the real history in our schools. Reform laws that keep cycles of poverty alive. Challenge jokes at dinner tables. Diversify hiring panels. These are not grand gestures. They are the daily bricks in the path toward justice. He looked up from the podium, his voice rising slightly. I'm not here to scold. I'm here to remind us that silence is a choice, and so is courage. We need less shame and more reflection, less defensiveness and more responsibility, less outrage and more outreach. The room thundered with applause again, some people standing now. I don't want statues torn down. I want stories lifted up. I want your children and mine to know that equality isn't a gift handed out by the powerful. It's a birthright claimed by the brave. He leaned forward one last time. And we, all of us in this room, have the power to be brave. With that, he stepped back from the microphone. The crowd erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes. People clapped, some whistled, some wept. A man in a wheelchair pumped his fist. An elderly white couple in the second row held hands tightly. And in the back, Helen sat very still, her eyes glistening. Not with shame this time, but with something new. Gratitude. After the event, Malik mingled with attendees in the courtyard. A young teacher approached him, holding a notebook filled with quotes from the speech. You've changed my whole curriculum, she said. Starting Monday, we're going deeper. A retired veteran nodded solemnly. Wish someone like you had been around when I was young. And then came Helen. She didn't speak immediately. She simply offered her hand. He shook it, neither smiling nor frowning. Thank you for seeing me as more than my worst moment, she said quietly. I didn't, he replied, but I hoped you'd grow past it. She nodded, her voice almost breaking. I'm trying. Malik nodded once. Then keep trying. They parted with no fanfare, no cameras. Just two people stepping into a fragile new chapter, where possibility was still alive. Above them, the banners swayed in the soft wind. Unity is not a destination, it's a practice. And tonight, for the first time in a long time, the city of Maplewood was practicing well. Speechless redemption. The city of Maplewood was unusually still on Sunday morning. After the energy of the Unity Forum, there was a hush in the air, as if the town itself were pausing, processing, reflecting, recalibrating. Churches filled with congregants who spoke less about doctrine and more about dignity. Teachers reshuffled lesson plans. Students discussed Malik Turner's speech in cafeterias and text threads. Something had shifted. But no one felt that shift more than Helen Cartwright. She stood before her mirror, her fingers fumbling with the clasp of her necklace. For the first time in weeks, she was preparing to step into a public space without a script, a podium, or a television camera. Just herself, flawed, exposed, trying. She was headed to a community conversation event hosted at the Maplewood Library. The flyer said, Open dialogue, healing through stories. No reserved seating, no media presence, no fanfare. Just folding chairs, open ears, and difficult truths. Helen didn't know what she'd say. Maybe she didn't need to. Across town, Malik dressed in a quiet moment of peace. He had declined further interviews since the Unity Forum. He wanted no book deals, no podcast series, no political endorsements. Fame had never been his pursuit. It had been a consequence. He looked over at his desk where dozens of thank you letters sat. Some from strangers, others from former students. But the one that stood out most was simple and handwritten. Thank you for speaking with grace when you had every right to rage. You gave me hope that people can change. I want to be one of them. Helen. He had read the letter 3 times, not because he forgave her completely, but because it reminded him why he had spoken up in the first place. Not for applause, for possibility. He grabbed his coat and headed to the event. The library's event room was modest. White walls, a few foldable tables pushed to the side, and a ring of plastic chairs forming a circle at the center. No one sat at the front. There was no stage. Just people from all walks of life. Young, old, black, white, brown, carrying stories, questions, and wounds. Helen arrived early and sat in the circle with her hands folded tightly in her lap. No one acknowledged her at first, but she was used to that now. Better silence than scorn. Malik arrived a few minutes later. When he entered, heads turned. Some smiled. A few nodded with respect. Helen watched him sit across from her, not avoiding her gaze. A librarian cleared her throat and spoke gently. Today is about listening. You don't need to have the right words. You only need to be willing to hear and be heard. The room fell silent, and then a young black man, about 20, wearing a university hoodie, stood first. My dad's from Nigeria, my mom's from here. When I was little, someone spray-painted "Go Home" on our garage door, he said. I remember scrubbing that paint off with my mom, and her hands shaking. I didn't understand it then, but now I do. He sat down. An older white woman stood next. I grew up in a house where the N-word was just normal. Sunday dinners, card games. My father called Martin Luther King a troublemaker. I never questioned it until I was almost 40. That's shameful. As she sat, more voices joined. Latinx immigrants, Asian mothers, biracial teens. Stories of exclusion, of unspoken bias, of waking up to the systems so many people sleepwalk through. And then, slowly, Helen stood. I was the woman in the cafe, she said quietly. I told a black man to go back to Africa. The room didn't gasp, didn't boo. It simply listened. I said it because I was angry, she went on, voice shaking. But more importantly, I said it because I hadn't looked at myself in years. I'd never questioned what I absorbed growing up, what I laughed at, what I stayed silent about. I convinced myself that being not racist was enough. It wasn't. Tears brimmed in her eyes. I humiliated a man who did nothing but ask for respect, and he met me with dignity. I'm not proud of who I was, but I want to be better than who I've been. She sat. No applause, just stillness. Malik waited a moment, then stood. People ask me all the time, he began, why I didn't snap, why I didn't shame her on the spot. The truth is, I've seen what shame does. It doesn't change people. It hardens them. What changes people is being seen. Fully. And given a mirror. He turned slightly toward Helen. She looked in that mirror. And she didn't turn away. The words settled in the room like dust catching light. People shifted, softened. The air was no longer thick with tension. It was filled with possibility. After the dialogue closed, attendees lingered. Some exchanged contact information. Others hugged. A small group of high school students surrounded Malik, asking if he'd speak at their assembly. He agreed. Helen lingered near the bookshelves, unsure if she should say anything more. But Malik approached her, calm as ever. No cameras here, he said with a half smile. No script either, she replied. Good. They stood quietly for a moment. Helen looked up at him. Do you believe I can really change? She asked. I believe people are more than their worst moment, Malik said. But only if they keep choosing to grow beyond it. Day after day. I'm trying. Then keep trying, he said. And when you're ready, teach someone else. She smiled, grateful tears in her eyes. Thank you for not choosing hate. Malik shook his head gently. I didn't do it for you. I did it for everyone watching. They parted without fanfare. No grand absolution. Just two people. Once enemies, now something closer to students in the same classroom. The sun had begun to set when Malik returned home. As he stepped into his apartment, he glanced at a photo of his father on the wall. Reverend Elijah Turner, smiling, arms crossed in front of a church. Malik whispered, You were right, Dad. Grace hits harder than rage. He set down his keys and looked out the window. Maplewood looked the same. Quiet trees, families walking dogs, kids on scooters. But Malik knew better now. Something had shifted, and in the silence that followed, the loudest sound was change, not shouted, but chosen.